Sophia had always believed in hard work. From the moment she was old enough to understand responsibility, she had been helping her mother keep their tiny apartment running. Now in her early 20s, she worked as a waitress at a small diner in the heart of the city, juggling long shifts with night classes, dreaming of a future where she wouldn't have to live paycheck to paycheck. Life had never been easy, but she had never complained. She took pride in her work, enjoyed chatting with the regulars, and even on the hardest days, she found joy in the small things, like watching the city wake up through the diner's large windows or the warm cup of coffee her coworker, Linda, always had ready for her in the mornings. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when she first saw him. The man sat in the corner booth, huddled in an old, ragged coat, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee like it was the only source of warmth he had left in the world. His face was shadowed beneath the hood of his coat, but even from a distance, she could see the exhaustion written in his posture. He had been sitting there for hours, nursing the same cup of coffee. Linda, an older woman who had worked at the diner for over 2 decades, leaned in toward Sophia as she passed. "Poor guy. He's been coming in every few nights. Never orders much, just coffee." Sophia frowned. "Does he have anywhere to go?" Linda sighed. "Doesn't seem like it, but he's polite. Never asks for anything, never causes trouble. Just sits there." Something about him tugged at Sophia's heart. She knew what it was like to struggle, to feel like you had nowhere to go. Without thinking twice, she grabbed a plate and filled it with the heartiest meal they had. A burger with fries and a steaming bowl of soup. She carried it to his booth, setting it down gently in front of him. "Here, eat." The man looked up at her, startled. For the first time, she saw his eyes, deep, piercing, but filled with a weariness she couldn't quite place. He hesitated. "I didn't order this," he said quietly. Sophia smiled. "I know. It's on the house." He stared at the food for a long moment before finally nodding. "Thank you." She watched as he took the first bite, eating slowly, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in days. And maybe he hadn't. Something about him felt out of place, like he didn't belong in the life he was living. "What's your name?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He hesitated again before answering. "Daniel. Nice to meet you, Daniel. I'm Sophia." He gave her a small, almost hesitant smile. "Nice to meet you, too." That was how it started. A single act of kindness. A meal shared in a quiet diner on a rainy night. Sophia didn't know it yet, but she had just met the man who would change her life forever. And Daniel? He wasn't just a homeless man struggling to survive. He was a billionaire in disguise. After that first meal, Daniel became a regular at the diner. He never asked for anything, but Sophia made sure he never left hungry. Every night, when her shift slowed down, she would slide into the booth across from him, a warm plate in front of him and a cup of coffee for herself. Over time, their small conversations turned into longer ones. Daniel was different. He wasn't like the other homeless men who sometimes came in for a free cup of coffee. He spoke with a quiet confidence, his words careful and deliberate, as if he had once belonged to a world far different from the one he now lived in. "You don't talk like most people who've been on the streets for a while," Sophia commented one evening as she refilled his coffee. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "I guess I had a different life once." She tilted her head. "What happened?" He hesitated, staring into his cup. "Life has a funny way of humbling you when you least expect it." Sophia didn't push. If he wanted to tell her, he would in his own time. She knew what it was like to have a past you weren't ready to talk about. As the days passed, Sophia noticed something else about Daniel. He wasn't just surviving. He was observing. One evening, as she counted the day's earnings, Daniel casually remarked, "Your manager's been underreporting the register totals." She froze. "What?" He gestured toward the receipts she had been going through. "Your numbers don't match up." He's skimming off the top. Sophia frowned, looking at the reports. The discrepancies were subtle, but now that she knew what to look for, they were there. How had Daniel noticed it before she did? "You know a lot about business," she said, studying him. He gave a small, tired smile. "Like I said, I had a different life once." A part of her was dying to ask who he really was before he became homeless, but she respected his privacy. Still, her curiosity grew. One night, after closing the diner, Sophia offered to walk with Daniel to where he was staying. He refused at first, but after some persistence, he agreed. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached an old, abandoned building near the edge of downtown. Daniel stopped at the entrance. "This is home," he said with a small smile, though there was no humor in it. Sophia's heart ached. She had assumed he was staying at a shelter. Not here. "Daniel, you can't keep living like this." "I've been through worse," he shrugged. Sophia frowned. "But you don't have to." He met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. "Why do you care so much?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing, and I've never forgotten it." Daniel nodded, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Then maybe one day, I'll tell you my story." That night, as Sophia walked home, she realized something. Daniel wasn't just another homeless man passing through. He mattered, and she wasn't going to let him slip through the cracks of the world. Daniel, meanwhile, watched her disappear down the street. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. He had been living in the shadows, hiding from his past, from the empire he had built and lost. But Sophia? She was pulling him back into the light, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep the truth from her. As the weeks passed, Sophia and Daniel's connection deepened. What had started as an act of kindness grew into something neither of them had expected. A friendship built on trust, understanding, and quiet companionship. Daniel still didn't say much about his past, but Sophia didn't need him to. She could see that whatever had happened to him had left deep scars. He was different from the other people she had met who had fallen on hard times. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, a strength that hadn't been completely worn away despite the hardships he had faced. One night, as Sophia was cleaning up after closing, Daniel lingered at his usual booth. She could tell something was on his mind. "You okay?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Yeah, just thinking." She tilted her head. "About what?" He let out a soft chuckle. "How strange life is. A few years ago I had everything. Money, power, success. Now I have nothing. And yet, sitting here talking to you, I feel like I have more than I ever did back then." Sophia's heart clenched. She had suspected he wasn't just any homeless man, but this was the first time he had given her a glimpse into who he had been. "You don't have nothing," she said softly. "You have me." Daniel looked up, his blue eyes searching hers. "Why do you care so much?" She shrugged. "Because I see you, Daniel. Not just the man sitting in front of me, but the person underneath all the layers. And I think you deserve better than this." He swallowed hard, as if her words had touched something deep inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Sophia found herself waiting for Daniel outside the diner, a thick coat in her hands. She had bought it for him that morning, knowing he would never ask for anything himself. When he arrived, he looked surprised. "What's this?" She held it out to him. "You need something warmer." Daniel stared at the coat, then at her. "Sophia, No arguments," she said firmly. "Just take it." He did, but not before reaching out and squeezing her hand in silent gratitude. It was the first time he had touched her, and in that moment, she knew. Daniel wasn't just a friend to her anymore. She was falling for him. Daniel felt it too. The way his chest tightened whenever Sophia smiled at him. The way he looked forward to seeing her every evening, like she was the only light in the dark tunnel he had been walking through for years. But he also knew that he couldn't keep the truth from her forever. He wasn't just another man who had fallen on hard times. He was Daniel Carter, former CEO of one of the most successful investment firms in the country. A man who had once been worth billions, but had walked away from it all after a scandal rocked his company, sending his world crumbling around him. He had been betrayed by those he trusted most, left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that his wealth had only ever brought him loneliness. And now, he had found something real. Sophia was real. But if she knew the truth, would she still look at him the same way? One evening, Sophia invited Daniel to walk with her through the city's Christmas market. The streets were alive with twinkling lights, the air filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and hot cocoa. They walked side by side, their fingers brushing every so often, but neither of them pulling away. She turned to him, eyes shining. "You ever think about starting over? Getting off the streets?" Daniel exhaled. "Every day." She smiled. "Then do it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years he thought, maybe he could. Maybe it was time to stop running from his past. Maybe it was time to fight for a future worth having. And maybe, just maybe, that future included her. As winter settled in, Daniel and Sophia's bond only grew stronger. Their evenings at the diner became something more than just routine. They became a lifeline, an unspoken promise that, no matter how harsh the world outside was, they had each other. Daniel found himself smiling more, laughing even. Sophia had a way of making everything seem lighter, even when life felt unbearably heavy. She never asked too many questions, never pushed him for answers he wasn't ready to give. She simply accepted him, and that was what made him fall for her. One particularly cold evening, Sophia found Daniel waiting for her outside the diner, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. She stared at them, her heart skipping a beat. "Where did you get these?" He smirked. "Let's just say I have connections." She took them, brushing her fingers over the petals. "They're beautiful. Thank you." He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me." "Not here." "A real date." Sophia blinked in surprise. A date. He had never asked her for anything before, and something about this felt different. She smiled. "I'd love to." That Saturday, Daniel arrived at her apartment, looking nervous for the first time since she had met him. She opened the door, dressed in a simple but elegant sweater dress. "You look nice," she teased, noting that he had cleaned up well despite the limitations of his situation. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You do too. More than nice." They walked to a small restaurant nearby. Nothing extravagant, but cozy, with dim lighting and the scent of home-cooked meals filling the air. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing, laughter coming easily between them. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt normal. Not a homeless man, not a fallen billionaire, just a man, sitting across from a woman who made him feel like he was worth something again. After dinner, they walked back through the city, snowflakes drifting around them. Sophia slipped her hand into his, and for once, Daniel didn't overthink it. He just let himself enjoy the moment. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she admitted softly. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. His fingers curled around hers, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Sophia, He hesitated. Should he tell her? Should he risk losing everything they had built? She looked up at him, her eyes filled with nothing but trust. "What is it?" He swallowed hard. I never expected to meet someone like you." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Me neither." The moment stretched between them, something unspoken but undeniable hanging in the air. And then, slowly, carefully, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was soft like a question, one that she answered by pulling him closer. When they finally parted, Sophia rested her forehead against his. "That was long overdue." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, it was." For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he had a future again. A future that didn't involve running or hiding. He had fallen for Sophia. But with that love came a terrible fear. What would she do when she found out the truth? Daniel knew he couldn't keep hiding forever. Every moment with Sophia made him feel more like himself, like the man he used to be before he lost everything. But he also knew that his secret was growing heavier, and the longer he waited, the more painful the truth would be when it finally came out. What he didn't expect was for that moment to come sooner than he planned. It started with a news report. One evening, As Sophia wiped down the counter at the diner, the television above the bar flickered with a breaking story. The anchor's voice was clear and urgent. Daniel Carter, former billionaire and CEO of Carter Investments, is presumed missing after disappearing from the public eye nearly 2 years ago. Carter, once one of the most influential figures in finance, was caught in a scandal involving corporate fraud. Though later proven innocent, he vanished before reclaiming his company. Sophia froze, the rag in her hand slipping onto the counter. Her breath caught in her throat as the screen flashed with a picture of Daniel. Not the Daniel in the ragged hoodie she had met months ago. A different Daniel, clean-shaven, in a perfectly tailored suit, standing in front of a building with his name on it. She gripped the counter to steady herself. No, this had to be a mistake. But as the reality settled in, the pieces started clicking together. The way Daniel spoke, his quiet but firm confidence, his knowledge of business, his sharp observations about money, the way he sometimes carried himself as if he didn't belong on the streets. It all made sense now. Daniel wasn't just some unlucky man who had fallen on hard times. He was a billionaire, and he had lied to her. That night, she waited for him. When Daniel arrived at the diner, he immediately knew something was wrong. Sophia stood outside, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Hey!" he greeted cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Sophia." She pulled out her phone, showing him the news article. "I saw this. I saw you." He inhaled sharply. The moment he had been dreading had finally come. And he wasn't ready. "I was going to tell you," he admitted. When?" She cut him off. "After we got even closer? After I told you how much I trusted you." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I never meant to lie to you. I didn't want to be Daniel Carter. Not with you." Sophia blinked. "Then who did you want to be?" He sighed. "Someone real. Someone you could care about without the money, without the expectations." Her heart twisted. "But you still lied." He stepped closer, his expression desperate. "Sophia, everything I felt, everything I feel, it's real. You're the only person who's ever seen me for me, not for what I have." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I need time, Daniel." The use of his real name sent a sharp pain through his chest. "Sophia, please," she whispered. He swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there under the dim streetlights, feeling more alone than he ever had before. For the first time since meeting Sophia, Daniel wasn't sure if he had just lost everything again. And this time, it wasn't about money. It was about the one person who had truly mattered. For days, Daniel wandered the city aimlessly, replaying Sophia's words in his mind. She had every right to be angry. He had lied, not out of malice, but out of fear that she would see him differently if she knew who he really was. But now it seemed he had lost her anyway, and that thought terrified him. Sophia, on the other hand, felt just as lost. She had spent so much time with Daniel, believing she knew him, trusting him, loving him, and now she didn't know what to think. He was a billionaire, a man who had lived a life she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And yet, when he had nothing, when he was living on the streets with nowhere to go, he had never acted entitled, never once made her feel small. She wasn't angry about the money. She was hurt that he didn't trust her enough to tell her the truth. Days turned into a week, and still, Daniel didn't show up at the diner. Sophia missed him, more than she wanted to admit. Then, one evening, as she was finishing her shift, Linda, her coworker and closest confidant, approached her with a knowing look. "Honey, are you going to let that boy suffer forever?" Sophia sighed. "He lied to me, Linda." Linda chuckled, shaking her head. "Yeah, but not for the reasons you think. That man was terrified of losing you. And from where I'm standing, he already has." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Did she really want to lose him? The next day, she did something she never thought she would do. She went looking for him. She searched the spots he used to frequent, the park bench where he liked to sit in the mornings, the abandoned building he once called home. But he wasn't there. Just when she was about to give up, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Sophia. She turned around and saw him standing at the edge of the street, looking exhausted, but still the man she had fallen for. She exhaled. Daniel. He hesitated, as if waiting for her to tell him to leave, but instead, she stepped forward. I'm still mad at you, she said honestly, but I miss you more than I want to admit. His expression softened, and for the first time in days, hope flickered in his eyes. Sophia, She held up a hand, silencing him. No more lies. No more secrets. If we're doing this, I need to know everything. He nodded. You deserve that. And with that, he told her everything. About his past, his fall from grace, the betrayal that had left him with nothing. He told her about the people who had stabbed him in the back, the friends who had disappeared when the money was gone, the loneliness that had consumed him. And through it all, Sophia listened. Not because he was rich, not because of who he had been, but because she loved the man in front of her, not the billionaire he used to be. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before finally saying, You should take it back. He blinked. What? She gestured at him. Your life. Your company. You didn't deserve what happened to you. And you're too damn smart to waste your life hiding. He stared at her, shocked. Of all the things she could have said, he hadn't expected that. You really think I can? He asked quietly. She smiled. I think you can do anything. You just needed someone to believe in you. His throat tightened. She wasn't just giving him another chance. She was reminding him who he really was. And this time he wouldn't let her down. This isn't just about you anymore, Daniel, she added. It's about us. His chest ached at her words. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Then let's do it together. She nodded. Together. And just like that, Daniel knew. It was time to reclaim everything he had lost. Not for himself. For her. For them. With Sophia by his side, Daniel felt like he had finally found his purpose again. He had spent so long running from his past, from his failures, that he had forgotten what it meant to fight for something, for someone. Now he was ready. The first step was reclaiming his name. With Sophia's encouragement, Daniel reached out to the board members of Carter Investments, the company he had once built from the ground up. He knew there would be resistance. After all, they had all assumed he was gone for good. But they weren't expecting him to walk through the doors of his own company with renewed confidence. He didn't come back demanding power. He came back with a plan, one that reminded everyone exactly why he had been a leader in the first place. Sophia watched from the sidelines as Daniel commanded the room, not as a man who had lost everything, but as a man who had learned what truly mattered. And in the end, the board didn't just reinstate him. They asked him to lead them again. With his company back, Daniel knew there was only one more thing he wanted to secure, his future with Sophia. She had never cared about his wealth, never treated him any differently when he had nothing. And that was how he knew that what they had was real. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sophia looked up, her eyes widening. Daniel! He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saw me, not for my name, not for my past, but for the man I could be. And because of that, I know I'll never stop loving you. Sophia's breath hitched, tears forming in her eyes. Daniel smiled. So, Sophia Evans, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was small, intimate, exactly what they wanted. Linda cried. Tom from the diner gave a speech that had everyone laughing. And when Daniel slipped the ring onto Sophia's finger, he knew that this was the life he had been searching for all along. Not the riches, not the status, but love, trust, and a future with the one person who had always seen him for who he truly was. As they danced under the warm glow of string lights, Sophia leaned in and whispered, So, does this mean I'm a billionaire now? Daniel chuckled. It means you'll never have to work another shift at the diner again. She smirked. Good, because I think I'm going to be too busy loving you for the rest of my life. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Sounds like the perfect job to me. And with that, their new beginning truly began.